Probably most famous these days for having spawned a TV show on Nickelodeon and for a few memes it generated, Barnyard would most definitely never rank as one of the best animated films ever made. Especially because not only does it lean a little heavily into adult humor, but almost feels like somebody mixed farm animals with Toy Story and The Lion King, but didn't really succeed in capturing the dramatic weight of either of them. But all that being said, is it really as bad as the critics say it is? Because once again, it's certainly no masterpiece, a little juvenile in nature, and the plot does feel a little all over the place, but based solely off its own merits, is it really the horrible abomination many reviewers would have you believe? Because some would argue that it's more just dumb fun with a valuable lesson to be taught than outright bad. And today, while trying to stay fair and impartial, I would like to go over both the pros and cons of this movie to try and determine how bad it actually is. And obviously there will be spoilers for this movie ahead, so in case you've been meaning to watch it and don't want to know what happens, you probably shouldn't proceed with this video. Alright. So, considering this movie was written and directed by the same man who created Jimmy Neutron, it's really no wonder that Barnyard is definitely weird. But the thing is, that's kind of the point of it. It's not trying to be on the same level as Pixar. To a degree, it's meant to be stupid fun. I mean, the male cows have udders just because the director thought it would be funny, for crying out loud. But the question must still be asked. Does it actually succeed in its task, or does the whole thing fall flat? Because as I've spoken about at length in other videos, writing a movie to be stupid without actually being bad can be pretty difficult. And honestly, Barnyard doesn't completely fail in that task, but it also doesn't completely succeed either. Because the plot itself is a pretty simple one. On a farm where the animals are just as intelligent as the humans when they aren't looking, a cow named Otis, who just wants to party around, suddenly finds leadership and responsibility thrust upon him when his father dies in a coyote attack. And once again, that's not actually a bad premise for a movie, but its execution is a little all over the place. Because to tackle the bad stuff first, a lot of the humor doesn't land, especially when it comes to the abuse the farmer takes after accidentally stumbling onto the animal's secret. Seriously, that was funny the first time, maybe even the second time, but by the fourth time, it's kind of stopped crossing the second line. And if you don't know what that means, you can find a link to the explanation in the description. And not to mention, it's also arguably too immature but adult at the same time. As in, a lot of the humor is clearly designed to appeal to little kids, that much is obvious, but a lot of the situations are really things that only adults or teenagers would fully understand. Really, if they had committed a bit more to the themes of the film and given it a PG-13 rating, they might have just been better off. And on the whole, it's just not as well written as it could have been, even for a movie that's trying to be stupid. But at the same time, that isn't to say that all the humor doesn't work, because there are some pretty funny moments, especially this.
It's right here, it's right here, it's right there.
I don't care what anybody says, that'll never not be funny. But while there are plenty of moments that do land, the problem is that it has just as many that don't. But somewhat surprisingly, where this movie actually does better is when it's trying to be more serious. For example, the relationship between Otis and Daisy is actually done better than one would expect. I mean, it's not the greatest relationship ever put on screen, but animated movies of this nature can be notorious for completely screwing up relationships and making the whole thing look like one big toxic, unhealthy mess. But that's not the case here at all. Instead, though Otis makes it obvious he likes her, he doesn't try to charm her or do unintentionally creepy things. He's just nice and polite to her. And for her part, it's obvious she sees right through his party animal and carefree exterior and can tell he's actually just a scared kid who needs to find his way in life. And as a result, when they finally do open up to each other, it feels completely genuine because the basis for it is actually there. Again, the two had had a few interactions, but hadn't really gotten to know each other. But moreover, it's understandable why they would eventually want to know more about the other. Again, for a movie about literal party animals, one would think that it was almost guaranteed that they'd completely screw up the romantic subplot. But it actually manages to avoid all the pitfalls and traps and is at the very least acceptable. And not to mention, pretty much everything regarding Ben works really well, to the point that some have even bestowed upon him the distinction of the coolest cow ever. And considering he takes on an entire pack of coyotes single-handedly and actually wins, that isn't exactly undeserved. But what's particularly interesting about him is the writer's decision to have him not actually be Otis's father. Because if Otis were his kid, it would basically be a given that he would treat him the way he does. But the fact that he found a stray calf and decided to take care of him to the point that he became the most admirable leader a farm could have ever asked for really says something about his character. As well as the fact that Otis treats him as if he were absolutely 100% his real father. He feels no extra obligation to him because he took him in, or is even more ashamed when Ben scolds him. Again, you can tell that to Otis, this man really is his father. But the same goes even more so for Ben, because he took this calf in and did everything to keep him safe, nurture him, and make him understand the value of leadership. And though Otis disappoints him with his behavior, Ben still loves him as the son he never had. My point is, some might have just washed their hands of Otis after getting tired of his behavior, but Ben instead proves to be the father every child should have, and no matter how frustrated he gets with him, always remains loving and understanding. But even apart from that, he also may just have the single best line in the entire movie. A strong man stands up for himself. A stronger one stands up for others. Because it's true. It's easy to fight for your rights or what you believe in, but fighting for other people requires a whole different level of bravery. Because it's easy to just stand on the sidelines and watch other people suffer or turn a blind eye to problems that don't concern you. But to throw yourself into a fight you don't have to defend somebody else is a true measure of how good a person is, especially when they personally have nothing to gain by interfering and still do it at personal risk to themselves. Again, that takes true strength, courage, and selflessness. And Ben believed in all of that so much that he was indeed willing to die to save the lives of others. And it's actually a rather sad moment because it's actually executed pretty well. And of course, the same goes for perhaps the most universally acclaimed part of the movie, Dag. Because simply put, this character just oozes with menace and honestly makes for the perfect threat, almost feeling like a serial killer that's somehow made into a Nickelodeon movie. I mean, sure, he is a carnival that's got to eat, but his extreme sadism and how he seems to relish in causing fear and death, that's what makes him so terrifying, as it goes beyond any predator just out for a meal or natural instinct. Really, not only does he make any scene he appears in suddenly feel dead serious, but he arguably manages to elevate the entire climax simply because of how utterly screwed Otis feels next to him. And indeed, in the end, he almost comes out on top. To put it simply, Dag feels like something ripped straight out of a Disney movie in terms of how effective he is, both in and outside the movie, and would probably be more well regarded as such had he come from a more notable film. But going along with that, there's also how the movie depicts Otis having to deal with suddenly being a leader before he's ready. Because while it doesn't handle it as gracefully as other animated movies have, it also depicts it pretty realistically. Because he's very unsure of himself, others try to exploit his inexperience for their gain, he uses his newfound position as a pretense to goof off, is faced with several reality checks that he needs to get his act together if he's to become an actual leader, and is ready to run away when the pressure of his responsibilities becomes too much for him. Again, this is all pretty relatable stuff, especially for anybody who's had to take up a position of leadership before they were ready. But in the end, Otis finally rises up to the challenge and makes Ben proud. And one thing in that regard that's done particularly well is the parallel that's made between them once they've defeated Dag. Because while one would expect Otis to not even hesitate in killing him in order to avenge his father, Otis instead shows the scum mercy because he knows that's what Ben would want him to do. Because even beyond the fact that that's what he himself did, he wouldn't want Otis to become a murderer on his behalf. And with that, Otis shows that he has all the makings to be just as good a leader as his father, and that Ben did well in teaching him, which is then followed up by the surprisingly poetic ending of Otis seeing the stars dance, just as he said Ben did the night he took him in. So, as I said before, when you really look at it, this movie does have its good points, particularly when it's trying to be serious. Because there's actually a pretty good story hidden in there, it's just not executed as well as it could have. And to be fair, some of the more comedic sequences do also work pretty well, such as their pathetic attempt to order pizza and the delivery guys not catching on only because they are complete idiots. Or stoned. Or the scene where Otis and the other cows go joyriding to get revenge on the obnoxious boy. Seriously, if that isn't one of the most blatant parodies of teenage roughhousing out there, I don't know what is. Though once again, in both these cases, it's actually older people who are more apt to appreciate the humor involved here, even if children will still find it funny, which is why I was saying the movie almost should have committed to that and been more adult-oriented. But I digress. Okay, so the point here is, Barnyard is certainly no masterpiece and does have plenty of flaws, but at the same time, it does also have its good points as well. So to say it was a total disaster would not really be fair to it. Though again, it is also meant to be a kids' movie, as the sometimes downright juvenile humor makes very obvious, so that must also be kept in mind when judging it as well. Which isn't to say that its flaws should be excused, just that it's understandable why the writers made some of the decisions they did. But in the end, To say it's a flawed kids movie with some redeeming qualities would probably be the most accurate way to describe it. Okay, I think that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that Barnyard is better than critics gave it credit for? Or do you think it's simply an immature mess, not even worth talking about? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And please remember that you are in no way obligated to agree with this video if you don't want to. You can feel absolutely any way about Barnyard and how good it is that you want to, and if you think I had it all wrong, that's completely fine. And thank you all for watching. It is all very much appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.